Renewed Volition is back. Your host here, Chris Lugo here. Renewed Volition, a new podcast series I started this year, a couple months ago. And, started to get into the works a couple months ago. It's actually a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to consider. If anyone's thinking about their own podcast out there, never underestimate how much time it takes to create a website and content and everything like that. But it's all good. It's all good. So we're starting to release podcasts now. We have guests that are taped, but I wanted to bring a special somebody in tonight. It's actually somebody that I've known, probably since 1979, I think from my kindergarten years. It's actually my good friend, Ray Padilla. Ray, you don't know how much it means to me to have you sitting here with me on my podcast, brother.
Yeah. I appreciate it, man. Here we are 40-something years later, and we went from playing in the woods as kids to doing a podcast. I'm honored that you asked me, man.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's no joke. I really think it's 43 years I've known you, right? And I know that a lot of the subject matter that this podcast is going to be about. I know you're really in tune with it.
Right.
We share a lot of, that drive,
right.
that determination. How do you get from, point A to point B, in the best way, shape or form, the best way possible. So I'm going to ask you, if you were to think back about, I don't know, let's go back to your 16-year-old self. All right? We've been there, 16 years old. Do you think you would have been where you are today back when you were 16 years old?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. It's one thing that I talk about pretty often with my wife and my kids, right? I always say, if you would have asked me 20 years ago, would I be here? Absolutely not. And I think we touched upon this a little bit earlier with a previous conversation. Looking back to when I was 16 years old, I was definitely that kid that, and I don't even know if you know this about me, but I was that kid that wasn't a good student, had pretty low self-esteem, right? I generally was a happy kid, but from a responsibility standpoint,
right,
I was really not doing much, Chris. I think I actually went to summer school every year when I was in high school for failing a class.
Are you serious? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I think even my senior year, I had to go to high school in order to finish high school. So, and when I compare those times to where I'm at today, it's two completely different times. And I could tell you, I didn't like that person that I was when I was 16 years old, and it was due to a couple circumstances. I just wasn't applying myself. I was kicking rocks. I wasn't making the right choices.
Kicking rocks.
Yeah. And I think, and the reason why I share this, because there could be people out there that are 16 or they could be 46 and they might be stuck in that same position.
Absolutely. It's I'm glad you kind of shared that too, because it was the same thing with me.
Right.
First 2 years of high school for me, disastrous. It got to the point where I had to switch schools, right, because I knew I was on the fast highway, the fast road to nowhere.
Right.
And it took me, a drastic change,
right,
like that, to realize you got to do better. You got to do better. And there's a second part to that, right?
Yep.
The second part to that is not only do you have to do better, but more importantly is you have to realize yourself you can do better.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing for me, was the accountability, right? I noticed back then when I wasn't applying myself, one of the things I thought about is not liking myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I needed to do to change that aspect. So,
right.
But I had every excuse in the book, right?
Right.
I can't do this. Oh, this teacher's doing this. And, every excuse in the book. But it clearly started to change when I started taking accountability and thinking about what I could change, right?
Right.
It wasn't everyone else's fault. It was my own fault that I was ending up in that situation.
Sure.
That word accountability for me is so important, because I think it changed my life. Like, once I started realizing, hey, it's that person that you're looking at in the mirror, that's what needs to change. not
Right.
your environment, not your surroundings, not the school. It's that person in the mirror. So I think that's when things started getting better.
That's so here. So I'm going to ask you something here. Was there ever that person, whether it's a teacher or something like that, that actually tried to give you that message, but you, in hindsight, you just kind of like blew it off? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. So I could say it was my parents.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right.
My parents. I come from a working class family, right? My dad was one of 12 growing up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. A real rough upbringing, and one of the things he was able to do was to get out of that environment and build himself up. And he worked for GM for 35 years. He was a machinist. I watched my dad work 2 and 3 shifts just to provide for his family. So that work ethic was really instilled in our family. But as a 16-year-old kid, when it's coming from your parents, you kind of tend to brush it off. You don't take it as serious, right?
Yeah.
But Chris, when I think back now and thinking about that kid that was in high school, and to answer your question, I think it was my mom and my dad, to be honest with you, that kind of sent that message, but I wind up getting it later as I grew older. So it really came from them.
Right. Would you say it took some time for it to settle in? Rather, that that message that they were trying to tell you, it actually rang true, right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Right. Absolutely. So fast forward, high school, going to college.
Yep.
You're in the pharmaceutical industry as a pharmaceutical sales rep now for what, 20 years?
Yeah. So my first half of my career was in pharma sales, and then my second half, for the last 15 years, I've been working for a small biotech.
Yeah. Right. And so let's go back real quick.
Yep.
Okay. The high school Ray realized, oh man, I got to do better. I got to get myself to, got to get my act together, so to speak.
Right.
And what was what was one of the catalysts that they're able to get you to the next step, and what was that next step for you from high school?
Yeah, so it was, the catalyst was not feeling good about myself and realizing why I'm not feeling good about myself, and I just wanted to feel better about the person I was. Right. So, and when you look at it, when we went to college, you and I, that's what our parents instilled in us, right? You look at the education system. My dad, like I said, he was a GM guy for 35 years. He kind of looked at it like no one in our family really went to college. So it was what our parents knew. Hey, you got to get an education.
Right.
You got to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Now I think in today's time, things are a little bit different. We steer our kids to be entrepreneurs, business owners, or college, right? There's more options, and we have more knowledge to present those options to our kids. But with that being said, I think, going back and thinking about like, what can I do to be more productive and change things about me that'll help me get to that level?
Right.
Again, I wasn't a good student, so my only option, which to today, looking back at it, was a great option, was starting off in community college.
Right.
I think that's America's best kept secret right there, right?
Sure.
Because
absolutely.
there is a business aspect to universities. They want these kids to go there. Education's expensive.
Oh, please.
So, for a kid like me, it was perfect. It kind of got me acclimated to a higher level of education. It taught me responsibility because you're making your own schedules and that sort of thing. And also, I think, going to county college, when I could see the work that I was putting in was reaping higher results than what I got in high school,
right,
it gave me the confidence to go on to the next level.
I think that's an important point right there. It gives you the confidence, right, to not just go on to the next level, but I think it gives you the confidence to try more things you would try now that you wouldn't have done so back then because the confidence is the difference maker.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. So when you actually think about where you've been, how far you've actually came, right? What would be, if you had to pick 3 things, let's just say, 3 pieces of advice, 3 slivers of advice that you can give someone, that says, hey, look, man, I'm going nowhere.
Right.
You know, what would you tell them?
Yeah. So these are going to sound a little bit cliche because we see these things all the time.
Right.
You know, I would tell a kid that a 16-year-old Ray, the first thing I would tell him is to not let anyone tell you can't do something. I think that,
amen. Yeah.
You know, when you're not doing that well in school and, you know, you're going to have that chatter. It's just the way it is, right? But one thing you have to realize about that, I don't think necessarily people are going to tell you like, hey, you can't do that, right? I think the reason why they're telling you that is because that's what they're seeing. And the reason why they're seeing that is because you're not doing everything that you can be doing.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think that would be the number one thing is like, hey, don't let anyone tell you that. But at the same time, don't tell yourself that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Don't tell yourself that you can't do something because you could do it. And I realize we all have all starting lines, right? You might look at a kid that's growing up in a lower socioeconomic community versus a kid that's growing up in Alpine, New Jersey.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, and I do understand where people make the argument to say like, hey, this kid has a harder time in the lower socioeconomic community. But one of the things that I think about, Chris, is these kids both have struggles, right? This kid might have some struggles that's in that couple $1 million home in Alpine that this kid can't relate to and vice versa. But they both have struggles, right?
Right.
And I think that if it's a matter of getting through those struggles, right?
Yeah.
And getting an understanding that you can actually do this. So I think that would be the first thing.
Right.
The second thing is to have the drive and the grit, right?
Drive and grit.
Get a good understanding that these things are not going to come easy. You know, I think back when that first year of community college, you might as well have sent me to Harvard, right? Because it seems super hard. It was community college, right?
Yeah.
The stereotype of community college, it's community college. It's easy. It wasn't easy for me, right? I was that kid that had to study tremendously hard to get a decent grade. And the third thing is trust the process. Because when I was studying hard to get those grades and then I actually saw the first B or the first A, I began to trust the process even at a higher level. Where I could say, I want to keep going with this. So, and you mentioned it earlier, it goes with the confidence that builds the confidence to get you to the next level. So I think those three things are important.
Right. Right. You know, I'm glad you mentioned, trust the process.
Right.
Because I think when you start trusting the process, you actually start trusting your own abilities.
Right.
And you start to see what you can do. Right. And you start to see what you can do. You start to see that there's a whole lot more within my reach than I actually think there is.
Right.
And there's a whole lot more than I ever thought that there was,
right.
Within my reach.
Right.
But you brought up a good thing, grit. Grit is that one intangible thing, right? Like we're talking about easier. You put it perfectly. When I was trying, to sum up grit, I was trying to say something along the lines of perseverance and things like that. And you say, no. Perseverance is too soft of a word.
Yeah.
Right, and I totally agree with that because you do need that grit.
Yeah.
There's there's like I mentioned before, there's actually a psychologist at University of Pennsylvania Wharton School,
right.
Angela Duckworth, who actually studies grit and went out there and actually tried to determine. I believe it was something like the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, or the United States Naval Academy. It was like one of those two.
Okay.
What dictates success?
Right.
They're all smart kids.
Right.
I mean, these are arguably the most selective schools in the country, right? Not only do you have to have the smarts, you have to have the discipline, you have to have the physical ability, right? And grit seemed to be that one unifying thing that got these cadets through.
Yep.
Right. And so I'm glad you brought up grit because it's something that honestly, I look at my kids, I don't see any grit.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it's like, well, how do you build that?
Yeah.
How do you build that?
So I could completely relate to that. My oldest is going to the magnet school, right?
Right.
It's hard to get in. These kids that are going there, they're all going to great universities. They all do well. And I'm proud of him. I think he's doing like so many amazing things, right? But you know what, Chris? I kind of look at it like he got inducted into the National Honor Society last night.
That's a great honor. Congratulations.
Super proud. I mean, it's one of those proud moments, right? You're seeing his hard work really pay off. But, you know, I think back to a conversation that we had in the car, and I said, these things are great, right? You know, because it's obviously that being inducted into the National Honor Society is something that you worked for, right? You got good grades, you got inducted. But I could tell you this, that piece of paper is not going to do anything for you unless you have that grit. And
True.
These are the conversations we consistently have in the house. You know, you could go to Harvard, you go to Columbia, any Ivy League school, right? And we can make the argument that it's going to open up some opportunities.
Sure.
But once you have that opportunity, what are you going to do with it, right? Are you just going to say, this is good enough, I'm in the door, and that's it, and be mediocre? Right?
Right.
Or are you gonna start putting extra effort to get to the next level? And I always talk about this with you, is we set the bar up here.
Yeah.
Even if we come here, we're good, right? But when you walk in that door and you're always gonna be here, you're learning something new, it's a new process, you got a new job, that piece of paper might have gotten you here, right? But if you're not working towards getting up here, then you're wasting your time, you're wasting everybody else's time. And that's where I think, like, you know, I'm also thinking about the internal emotions when you have grit. It's the feeling of accomplishing something. It relates to happiness.
Sure.
So when you see yourself progressing and getting to the next level, you know, it improves every aspect of your life, right? And I heard a quote at this induction ceremony that it was by Audrey Hepburn. One of the kids said it.
Right.
He's like, as you get older, you realize you have two hands, right? One to help yourself and the other to help others. So, you know, what I explained to my son is, you know, you got to have that grit. And once you start getting to this, right, where you get to a high level, and he's not there, he's only 16, right?
You'll get there.
But he'll get there, right?
Yeah.
You got to use this other hand to help others.
Right.
Because I think, you know, maybe if I would have had that, like I said, I come from a working class family. My parents did the best they can, right? But I think if I would have had that from an outside source when I was 16 years old, there would have been a better Ray there, right?
Right.
Alongside of me recognizing what I needed to change and taking that accountability. You put those two forces together and it's going to be something powerful. And I look at our overall society like that, Chris, and I'm like, man, if we could just apply, do better, have that gritty mentality, right? Regardless of what the circumstances are. I don't care if you're born with a certain characteristic and society is telling you, hey, you can't do something because of X, Y, and Z, right? It goes back to what I said earlier, is you shouldn't believe that. And you shouldn't allow yourself to believe that. And actually, I would say use that as fuel to do better.
To do better.
Right? Yeah. Sometimes you got to dig deep and find that grit within you. So, you know, I look at my kids, they're growing up in a totally different environment that I grew up in. We can make the argument that they're going to have more opportunity, but what are you going to do with that opportunity? And I think that's where the grit comes in.
Absolutely. You know, and, you know, you brought up a good point, you know, with the two hands, right? Use the one hand to help others, right? I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly why I started this podcast, because I do think you can help a lot of people by having them realize, you know what, I can do better. You know, there's always that next level where I can always bring myself to, you know, and see, complacency is a bad thing. Right.
Yeah.
You know, because once you've reached somewhere and you're like, okay, I'm good. Right. Then there's not a lot of pursuit afterwards, you know, to go and strive to do better things. But when you talk about grit, right. You know, you can talk about grit to get into college. You know, you can talk about grit to be competitive with a job. Right. But you could also talk about grit with people, you know what, that really want to do something better. Really, that really want to is like, you know what? I really want to put myself into better shape. I really wanted to start that hobby that I was kicking the can down the road for 10 years. You know, getting your pilot's license or scuba, whatever it might be. You know what I'm saying? Opening that art studio that you always wanted to do. You know, like I wanted this to be an avenue, you know, to help folks learn from others right? And a lot of the business concepts too, that you learn. You know what? It's not just for business. You could apply them, to your own situation,
right,
and use that, to become better.
That's right. So, you mentioned earlier working for pharmaceutical companies and sales and that sort of thing. Typically salespeople tend to be competitive, right? You work for these companies, and I've been fortunate enough now with a small biotech company working in a disease state that carries a lot of stigma. And these people, unfortunately, the patient population is a population that's been really down and out. Childhood trauma, things that were beyond, out of their control, right? And they're in a position where they feel like life is over, right?
Yeah.
So with that being said, Chris, I think I used my experience in pharma sales to make a move to this small biotech company, and it puts me in the position where I'm super passionate about my job. And the reason is because, yes, I might not have walked in your shoes, right? But the one thing that I can offer is that 16-year-old Ray who didn't feel good about himself, right? And maybe, not that I'm comparing the two, right? Maybe that 16-year-old Ray had it easier. Maybe not, right? But with that being said, my goal is to provide a service to help these people see that they don't get stuck there.
Right.
And I'm able, my pharmaceutical experience gave me the ability, if I had the grit in the pharmaceutical experience, to do well, to be able to move to a biotech company. And the two went hand in hand, that I just happened to find a disease state that I'm passionate about, because it gives me the platform to be able to help people.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I could say, Chris, and this applies with grit, I don't care what level of socioeconomic status you are, what characteristics, if you're Caucasian, African American, Asian, whatever it is, right? We're human beings. And in order to get to a better place, that word grit has to come in at some time, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's your mindset, whether it's what you're doing physically, right? Whether it's your approach to life. I think, and we're hearing that word a little bit more often now, which is a good thing, because we are also living in a society that we tend to pity a lot, right? And I heard this word pity. We feel bad for these people. We feel bad for those people. And there's a lot of talk about it, but there's not much action.
Not a lot of action.
So I look at it, Chris, and it's not just with my kids or your kids, who I love like my kids. I've known you my whole life, right? So I'll do anything for your kids. Is if I could offer anything, and this is why I appreciate you having me on this podcast, because I hope someone listens to this that says, man, maybe that's my answer, is if I apply a little bit more grit and, perseverance, a little bit of a soft word, but perseverance, let's just say, right?
Yeah.
If we have a little perseverance, I could get where I want to be. It is possible, man. And I've seen these people that I work with that are so down and out get to unbelievable places. And you can't put a dollar amount on that, man, right? The mom who might call me and say like, hey, my son just enrolled in Rutgers, or, I can't put a dollar amount on that. And I could tell you the people that have been successful, it's because they had that grit. Because
they have the grit.
Yeah.
They have the grit. They have the desire to do something, right? To, there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about, folks who've actually done something with themselves. The reasons might be a little bit different. Right. But when you think of J.K. Rowling, right, an unemployed mother, I believe at the time, who stuck to a passion of, being an author, writing books, she ends up writing maybe one of the best fictional series of all time, and becoming a self-made billionaire, right? You think of other folks that they just start from very humble beginnings. Dave Thomas with Wendy's, right? I mean, that's a classic example. He didn't even finish high school, right? But he had the drive to continue. He knew that there was a better day. Just keep working hard. Don't shy away from it. Right. And, you know, I know it's a controversial, figure at the time, but Jeff Bezos is another one,
Right?
You know, it's you could create or not create examples, but you could list examples of folks that that they were able to see, hey, if I want to get to that next level, this is what I need to do,
right?
And it's not sitting around doing nothing.
That's right. So and those are pretty extreme examples, right?
They are extreme.
So,
yes.
But your previous guest, Dr.
Scott Galkin.
Dr. Scott, something he said resonated with me. I love his podcast. I thought it was I listened to it. I'll watch it twice, right? I thought it was great. And the reason why I thought it was great, Chris, is because, part of the podcast mentioned that his father was
an orthodontist.
Was an orthodontist, right?
Yes.
I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people watching this guy's story would say, oh, but his dad was an orthodontist. It must have been easy for him, right?
Right.
I thought the opposite, right? I thought a couple things when he said that. I said, man, and this guy was still able to put himself in that position, right?
Right, yeah.
It took a lot of hard work, and it took a lot of grit to get there.
100%. And he graduated number one in his class.
And he graduated number one in his class. So, I think that a lot of our society would look at that guy and say, oh, it must be nice. Or, hey, you had it easier because your dad was an orthodontist. I was thinking the opposite, right? I was thinking that guy probably had just as many struggles as a kid that didn't have a dad, right? Unique to him, but this guy still went and was able to become an orthodontist, graduating number one in his class. That to me is inspirational, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And I was listening to the talk, and I was like, one of the things that I try to teach my kids is let's stop having these stereotypes, right? Just because someone's dad is the CEO or Jeff Bezos or whoever doesn't mean that they have it easy. If we could get all in the same mindset, right, where we all have to apply ourselves, we all have to work. And again, I mentioned this earlier, I completely understand. We all have a different starting position, right? But you could easily surprise yourself where you could go if you're accountable for your actions, if you set your mind to it, setting goals, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay to ask for help, right? And I think,
yeah,
it's okay to have a mentor. To be in the position that I'm in today, I had no shame in asking higher level people like, hey, how do I do this? Or how did you get there? Or knowledge is everything, right?
Yeah.
I know you like to read. I mean, I can't sit for more than 5 minutes, right? But, there's so many resources available today, right? I look at these younger people who they have all these YouTube, they could start a business. If you want to be a welder or an electrician, you go into these programs, which is a great living, right? But
absolutely.
How do you do it? You have all the resources, the internet, and I think not knowing something and saying like, hey, how do I do this? Or what's the roadmap? You start picking up different things, and the most important thing is what you do with what you pick up, right?
Yeah.
What you do with that information. It's not good enough just to have that information in your brain.
No.
If you're not applying it.
If you're not applying it, I agree.
Take that step and apply it. I guarantee you will surprise yourself. And I think that's what, and it goes across all age groups, right? It's never too late, but
agree.
Especially with our younger generation. People complain they're on the gadgets too much, they're this, they're that. I don't know if it's us getting older, and that's just we were always out on the street, right?
We were.
So
that was our social network.
That was our social network, right?
Yeah.
So with that being said, I don't know if it's because we're older and hey, that's just the way the world is, right? And we're always fighting I know I fight with my little one to get her off the iPad and that sort of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The struggle is real.
Yeah. And then my 14-year-old, she's got a big social network. She's the popular, so I always worry about that aspect of it, right? But with that being said, I think that, these things that we might be fighting against could also contribute to their overall success, right?
Sure.
If they use it in the right way.
They use it in the right way.
So I think as parents, we owe that to them. And, at my age, I'm still learning and I'm still trying to grow and I'm still trying to better myself. And I'm trying to use all the resources that I can.
Right.
So, and I'm hoping that as I get a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher, it definitely brings me a peace of mind. It brings me happiness. It brings me peace, right? And I'm hoping that knowledge that I could pick up from other people, I could pass that on.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the best things that you can do.
Right.
Is help help show somebody else the way.
Right.
I think is one of the best things that you can do.
Right.
And no, very well said. But Ray, I want to thank you. Thanks so much for coming in. And hey, will you come back? Will you come back?
Oh, absolutely, man.
Absolutely. I hope because I think there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about.
Yeah.
But your insight is spot on. I'm totally in line with it, and a lot of people can learn from what you just said.
Right.
And thanks for joining me.
Yeah,
today,
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. And I hope all of you that are watching too. Like I said, this is why I started this. I want everybody to be able to take something away from this that makes you a little bit better today than you were yesterday, and keep going down that road. As you just mentioned about accomplishment, right? There's nothing more than that gratifying feeling, of having accomplished something.
Right.
No one could ever take it away. But until next time, everybody, I'm Chris, Renewed Volition. Thanks for joining with us. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody.